Good morning. I know it's good public speaking practice to begin with a joke or a lighthearted comment, but that's just not where my week was this last week, and Diane's song kind of put me over the edge here. As somebody noted to me this week, accurately so, I don't follow local news that closely, but there's been a national news story that has been unavoidable. One that actually broke last week on October 1st, when a young man entered a classroom at Umpqua Community College in Roseburg, Oregon, and shot and killed 8 people, wounded 9 others, before turning the gun on himself and shooting and killing himself. That kind of senseless and random violence is disturbing. And it's disturbing partly because it has happened before. It's happened in school classrooms. It's happened at a political rally, in a movie theater, in a church Bible study group. Some of the survivors from Umpqua have noted that the shooter asked people before he shot them, "What is your religion?" Or even, "Are you a Christian?" And it's led me to think a lot this week about what I would do in a similar situation. Let me just tell you, no one has ever pointed a gun at me, let alone someone who I just saw kill other people. I've had a few incidents in traffic where I've been a little bit worried, but I have never felt like my life was in danger, and I certainly have never felt like there was somebody who wanted to kill me. I hope you have never been in that situation. But I think it's important for us to consider how we would answer the question, "Are you a Christian?" when we have the opportunity to do so without a gun pointed at us. I know a national newscaster asked a 2016 presidential candidate that if there was a shooter with a gun pointed at him, how would he answer the question, "Are you a Christian?" And he said, "Well, I like to think I wouldn't just stand there and let somebody shoot me. I would call out to the other people in the room, 'Come on, let's get this guy,' because even if I wouldn't survive, some of them surely would, and we could stop him." For me, I just hope that I would have the courage to say, yes. Yes, I am a Christian. Jesus Christ is my Lord. And kill me or spare me, my life belongs to Jesus. Now, I know that's a lot easier to say standing behind a pulpit than it is when my life is in danger. But I pray that that's what I would say. Now, this has generated some conversation for other places in the news, too. Governor Ron Ramsey of Tennessee issued the following statement, which said, "I would encourage my fellow Christians who are serious about their faith to consider," you know what the end of that statement was? "To consider praying for the victims and their families?" No. "To consider recommitting their lives to Christ?" No. "To consider how Christians should respond in the face of evil?" No. Here was Governor Ramsey's entire statement. "I would encourage my fellow Christians who are serious about their faith to consider getting a handgun carry permit." Now, I consider myself a Christian who is serious about her faith. That is not an option which had occurred to me. We can't deny that evil exists. There is evidence of it all around us, and it becomes newsworthy when that evil erupts in terrible ways. I'd like to share this story of an influential theologian of the last century, Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Bonhoeffer was born into a well-educated German family. By the age of 14, he felt a call to study theology. He showed great promise as a scholar and an academic. And in 1930, when he was only 24 years old, he became a lecturer in systematic theology at Berlin University. In 1933, the National Socialism Party came to power in Germany, led by a man named Adolf Hitler. Bonhoeffer resigned his seat at the university, left Germany in order to pastor in London. In 1937, Bonhoeffer wrote a book called The Cost of Discipleship. And in this book, he coined a phrase, cheap grace. Now, you might be thinking, of course, grace is cheap. Grace is free. That's right. It's a foundational belief of our church that grace is a free gift of God. And this was certainly part of Bonhoeffer's Lutheran upbringing as well. But things that are free can still come at a cost. Bonhoeffer was concerned about a church where intellectual consent to the idea of grace was all that it took to be delivered from sin. You can do what you want, live how you want, have whatever you want, as long as you claim God's grace. Bonhoeffer writes, cheap grace is grace we bestow on ourselves. Cheap grace is preaching forgiveness without requiring repentance, baptism without church discipline, communion without confession. Cheap grace is grace without discipleship, grace without the cross, grace without Jesus Christ. In contrast, costly grace is the call of Jesus Christ at which the disciple leaves his nets and follows him. Such grace is costly because it calls us to follow. It's grace because it calls us to follow Jesus Christ. It's costly because it will cost us our lives. And it is grace because it gives us the only true life. It's costly because it condemns sin. It's grace because it justifies the sinner. And above all, it is costly because it cost God the life of his Son. Here's the crux of Bonhoeffer's thesis. Grace is following Jesus. The road to faith passes through obedience to Christ's call. When we hear the call of Christ, the next step is to drop our nets and follow him. If our discipleship is to be authentic, we can't separate our belief from our behavior. If we believe in Jesus, then we follow Jesus. And it is in following Jesus that we learn to believe. Following Jesus is not an intellectual exercise. It is something that will have practical, observable results in the way that we live our lives. Bonhoeffer says, Christianity without the living Christ is inevitably Christianity without discipleship. And Christianity without discipleship is always Christianity without Christ. In Philippians 3, Paul writes about a righteousness which comes through faith in God, not a righteousness of our own. Paul says, I want to know Christ and the power of his resurrection and the sharing of his sufferings by becoming like him in death, if I may somehow attain resurrection from the dead. We can't know Christ and the power of resurrection until we have experienced the death of letting go of our nets and letting go of our identity as fishermen. My Bible study group was a little taken aback by verse 8. The last part of that says, "For Christ's sake, I have suffered the loss of all things, and I regard them as rubbish." Such a harsh word, rubbish. We wondered if maybe another translation would have something that was a little less trashy. So Tom Nowicki pulled out his iPad and looked at the King James Version. You know what the word is in the King James? "I regard all of these things as dung." Oh, that wasn't better. So I cross-checked a bunch of translations this week, and here were the words they used: rubbish, trash, filth, worthless trash, refuse, dung, and excrement. That is quite a lineup. The word which Paul uses here in Philippians appears only 5 times in the Bible. 2 of them are in the book of Nehemiah, and the word rubbish is used pretty literally. They're rebuilding the temple wall, and they're using the rubbish from the destroyed temple to rebuild the wall of the new temple. The other Old Testament reference is in Lamentations, when those who are left in Jerusalem after the city has been destroyed are called the rubbish of the city. And the other 2 references are from Paul. One of them is here in this Philippians passage, and it means rubbish. I think Paul is being dramatic here to make a point. He's just been describing his pretty impressive credentials as a super Jew. He was born into the right group of people, into the right tribe, into the right family. He had the right education as a Jewish rabbi, and his heart was in the right place when it came to defending the Jewish faith against heresy. And then he says, compared to knowing Christ as Lord, all that other stuff is rubbish. All of that other stuff is bull dung. My favorite translation said, I threw it all away to gain Christ. Do you think that Jesus called Peter and Andrew because they were really, really good fishermen? Do you think he was so impressed that that's why he wanted them to be disciples, that like, wow, these guys could be great at fishing for people? I don't think that's the reason. Read the calling of the disciples in Luke 5 if you think these guys were really good fishermen. We just have to get over the fact that Jesus is not that impressed by our worldly achievements. I grew up in the Church of the Brethren. I married into a family that's influential in the Church of the Brethren. My father was a well-known author and theologian. I have invested a fair amount of time and money in a seminary degree, and I was recognized with departmental awards at graduation. Do you think any of that would matter if somebody pointed a gun at me and said, "Are you a Christian?" and I don't know Jesus Christ? As far as eternity is concerned, my efforts are rubbish. This is actually really good news because I'm not righteous on my own. I'm not righteous because I have followed the law. My righteousness comes from God because I'm a follower of Jesus Christ. I want to circle back to Dietrich Bonhoeffer, that all-star theologian and academic who made some pretty big claims about the cost of discipleship. In 1935, after pastoring in London for 2 years, Bonhoeffer felt called to return to Germany. After he got back, he was expelled from the university in 1936 because he'd made some radio broadcasts that were pretty critical of the Fuhrer and of the church for its non-resistance and compliance with the Nazi regime. He became a strong voice in the religious and political underground, and he was a major planner in a plot to assassinate Hitler, a plot which we know was unsuccessful. On April 4th, 1943, Bonhoeffer was found and arrested, and he spent the next 2 years in German prisons and concentration camps, where he provided inspiration to other prisoners and even gave some testimony that allowed some of them to be freed. On April 9th, 1945, just a couple days before the Allied liberation, Bonhoeffer was executed by the Gestapo. He was 39 years old. If the witness of one man who committed his life to discipleship can have such an enduring impact, imagine what a whole bunch of disciples could do. I'm sure you're familiar with collective nouns that describe groups of things. Things like a school of fish, a flock of geese, a pride of lions. You know what I'm talking about, right? You know what the collective noun is for disciples? A church. It's a church of disciples. A group of people who are committed to following Jesus together. In order to be the church of Jesus Christ, we need to make a personal commitment to follow Jesus and to accept the costly grace that we have been called to. But the journey of discipleship also calls us into community, to support each other along the way, to encourage those who are struggling, to call out gifts and talents, to strive for our goals together, to be more as a church than we could ever be as individuals. But being a community has its costs too. It means listening to other people. It means listening together for Christ, even if it means changing the way we've always done things. Part of being disciples together is to discern not only where we should be going, but what things we might need to leave behind. I thank you for your study of these scriptures over the past 4 weeks. I hope it has been a good experience for you to be part of the long Brethren tradition of gathering together to read and pray around the Bible. Thank you for the sharing that you have done with each other. Thank you for the sharing that you have done with me. And if you have been paying any attention to these scriptures, you know that the journey of discipleship doesn't end here. Not in this place, not at this time. Christ continues to call us, and we are still challenged to drop our nets and go out. And not go out into the gathering area. I mean, go out from this place to be the church of Christ in the world and to follow wherever Jesus calls. Amen.